In the next few minutes, I'm going to talk through the importance of research for a World Heritage Site, the Derwent Valley Mills in particular. I'll also cover the opportunities that arise from having World Heritage status and some of the more recent acquisitions that have been made. These are a few of the researchers that stepped forward when the decision was made to put forward the Derwent Valley for inscription to UNESCO in 2001. There wasn't much time available for the required level of detail to be gathered, so it was important to use local researchers who understood the communities and landscapes within the defined boundaries and had some understanding of where information could be found if they didn't already have access to it. All of that information was compiled and became a key section within the nomination document submitted to UNESCO late in 2001. It's now available in the history section of the Derwent Valley Mills website at www.derwentvalley.mills.org. But research doesn't stop when you're inscribed onto the World Heritage List. Work was carried out following inscription to create a research framework to identify which areas of our collected knowledge weren't complete and where more work needed to be done for us to truly understand the story of the Derwent Valley Mills. That's now available as an online wiki. Google Derwent Valley Mills Research Framework to find it. We try to encourage as many researchers as possible to engage with the research framework, and that's the full breadth of what we consider a researcher to be. Whether it's an academic or someone who's curious about their family history, they all may have something that helps us further clarify and understand our World Heritage Site's outstanding universal value. The Derwent Valley Mills World Heritage Site Partnership holds a workshop for researchers most years, encouraging new research, providing suggestions as to where information can be found, and showcasing other people's research work and projects in all their different forms to show the breadth of uses we have for new knowledge as it comes forward. Outside those workshops, there are other activities including training with the volunteers who work tirelessly along the valley to tell its story in an accurate and engaging way, looking at materials which can help them better inform the public. And when research is written up and peer reviewed, it is made available to a wider audience through the research pages of the derwentvalley.mills.org website. One of the most valuable areas of research work in recent years, which has its own section on the website, is the exploration of the Derwent Valley Mills global cotton connections, specifically the impacts of the cotton trade which fed the mills along the Derwent, the ferocious appetite of the mills for cotton here and then across the UK led to a massive increase in cotton plantations, many of which were worked by enslaved people. This research area pulls together all that has been discovered so far about the Derwent Valley's links to cotton produced by enslaved people. Much of that research has been carried out and coordinated by Dr. Suzanne Seymour of Nottingham University, seen here on the left, and one of the projects which was engaged with that research is Standing in This Place, in which artist Rachel Carter has created a sculpture of an enslaved cotton worker clasping hands with a mill worker. It recognises the contributions of countless unnamed women who were key to the success of the East Midlands cotton textile industry in the 18th and 19th centuries. The sculpture stands within the revamped Broadmarsh area of Nottingham as a permanent reminder. For people who have carried out research they feel relates to the Derwent Valley Mills and their stories, and who are happy to share that research with a wider audience, then there is a form available on the website which will allow them to submit it for inclusion on the research area of derwentvalley.mills.org. Let's move on. Whilst World Heritage status doesn't come with any money from UNESCO or the UK government, it does bring a level of prestige which helps to some degree in securing grant funding for projects which relate to the site. One area of grant funding we were able to secure in recent years was called Great Place, a collaboration between the National Lottery Heritage Fund and Arts Council England. It allowed a number of projects to go forward in the Derwent Valley between 2017 and 2023, one of which was the digitisation of over 100 related maps held in the Derbyshire Record Office. The project began with work to identify what maps and plans were held, and we were amazed at how many there were. Once this list had been compiled, we had to decide which would be the most useful for digitisation. This work, much of it carried out by a team of dedicated volunteers, involved a lot of unrolling of maps and studying of the information they gave in terms of when they were produced, by whom, and for what purpose. What became clear very quickly was that we have some enormous maps at the Record Office, and these were the hardest to engage with, some being the size of carpets and quite tricky to study. So they were digitised first, but many more followed. And what a treasure trove of information these maps and plans have provided. For example, this 1792 Strutt map of Milford shows the road from Duffield, on the bottom left, coming to a junction at the farm of Samuel Harvey, now the site of the Elephant and Peacock restaurant. Here you could turn left onto the Chevin Road, or right down to the River Derwent, where a chain ferry operated. The ferry is represented on the plan by a small boat. At the time the map was produced, the new bridge across the river was about to be built, replacing an earlier footbridge. Both are marked on the plan. A road connecting the new bridge to the Chevin Road is marked on the map and became part of the main route through the village. Here's a later tithe map of Cromford showing the extent of the mill workers' housing in the village by 1841. And this is the Belper section of another Strutt map, one of the larger ones, showing the lands held by the family company in 1819. Zooming into it, we can start to understand ownership better, for example on Bridge Street. Obviously, we don't have photography from 1819, but we do from 1870, and using the information on the map, we can name areas and identify who owned which building, as all of these have survived and still stand on Bridge Street. And we also get a better feel for what the mill complex looked like at that time. The photograph is an aerial view from 1921, the earliest of any in the valley, taken from a hot air balloon. It shows the mills at their most complete, but comparing it to the map, you can see that some buildings had already been removed during the 102 years since the map was created, particularly buildings linked to the South Mill. And this is rather interesting, a close-up of Belper Lane where it meets Wyver Lane with the Talbot Inn and Bridge Hill bottom left. The small circle in the centre, sufficiently blown up, reads Ice House. This was presumably for Bridge Hill House, the Strutt family's primary residence, but when we compare it with a satellite image, we can see that the remnants of an ice house may be buried in the back garden of a house on Belper Lane. It's these little discoveries that make the digitisation on the maps so worthwhile. Another plan from 1847 shows the Strutt properties in Derby overlaid at a later date with Albert Street and Princes Street, which helps us to pinpoint where their mills and homes were located. And this, another from 1819, labels many of the field names in the Belper Lane area of Belper, an important resource for keeping the old land names alive. Of those old names, perhaps the most significant for Belper is Hutfall. The Hutfall was the name of the old village field pre-enclosure. It turns up on the 1819 Strutt estate map as a district of the town, and Field Lane was, at that stage, the Hutfall Field Footway. It was the evidence in this map that enabled us to ensure that a new development off Field Lane was named the Hutfall a few years ago, perpetuating the name. Let's move on to photography. These next few were donated to the World Heritage Site by Tony Bowker, the last manager of the Derwent Valley Mills at Belper, Masson and Milford before their closure. They were all being thrown in a skip, but he rescued them, and they now reside with the Derbyshire Record Office. Tony has since died, but thanks to his awareness of their importance, these images survive where they can be seen and studied. The first is of Masson Mills in the 1970s, window cleaning at the end of ropes thrown over from the roof. And this is Milford, shortly after the mill site was cleared in 1964. The turbine house was the only surviving building on this side of the road and can be clearly seen in an open space next to the old wheel pit. The dye works on the opposite side had been rebuilt and would continue to operate for a couple of decades more. In the distance is the foundry, which is also now gone. and there was a valuable set of photographs relating to the round mill at Belper. This unique building, created by William Strutt, was based on Jeremy Bentham's panopticon concept of a circular structure where everything could be seen from the centre. With a ventilation system drawing the cotton dust-filled air out through the roof, it was a remarkable building, although proved not to be adaptable as cotton spinning machinery grew in size. A decision was made to demolish it in 1959. No record of how it had been built had survived. At lunchtime, many of the men working on the site had left to get something to eat, so only a few were on site when the building imploded. 4 men died and 2 others were seriously injured in the collapse. One man was working near the top and fell over 15 feet as the floor collapsed under him, and he escaped with just a cut wrist. His colleagues weren't so lucky. Police called in the civil defence to help in the search, but no one was sure where they were under the rubble. It was a terrible incident, with the greatest recorded loss of life in the town in a single day, but it could have been much worse. These images were collated by the owners, the English Sewing Cotton Company, after the collapse, and an investigation was made into why it happened. The report doesn't seem to have survived, but thankfully these images have. Other images show people working in the Derwent Valley mills around that time, including Walter Lawton, seen here with a doubling machine at Belper. The Record Office holds other treasures which help us to better understand the World Heritage Site, including this album of images relating to the work of Maurice Hunter, the Strutt family's favoured architect at the end of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Hunter and Woodhouse were commissioned to carry out a vast number of projects, particularly in Belper and Milford, and this album shows what was done and, importantly, what they replaced. One of the images is of the Castle Factory, built on Derwent Street in Belper, with a music hall, the Empire, at one end. The factory was used to produce hosiery, then blouses, then used by Rolls-Royce during the Second World War, before confectionery producers Thorntons took it on from 1947 until 1999. The Empire building now houses Belper Library, and the facade of the factory has been reused for the Ada Belfield Care Centre. This is the earliest known image of that building. Hunter and Woodhouse created the plans for Devonshire Terrace on Bridge Street, but also took on one of the buildings on the far right as their office as well. The album has the only known image of Makeney Hall, or Makeney House as it was known then, before Hunter and Woodhouse massively increased its size for Herbert Strutt at the end of the 19th century. The chimney on the left is a good indicator of how big that extension was. The chimney is now in the centre of the image, and you can see a whole new wing has been added to the right, complete with copper dome and large bay windows built to the left of the chimney, with more on the far left. The old Makeney Road ran very close to the property, and again the album shows the road before it was diverted away from the house, which is on the right. This photograph, looking in the opposite direction, shows the realigned wall after the changes had been made. There's a vast number of papers relating to the Strutt family in the Derbyshire Record Office, some of which have barely been studied. Some relate to the mills, some to the wider estate, and some give us a sense of who these people were and how they lived their lives. This bundle of letters relates to George Herbert Strutt after he'd sold the mills, and his family as they moved between their houses in Belper, Wales and Scotland. A letter here talks about his younger daughters preparing to be presented at court in June 1924. Here, a 1925 letter has survived from the British fascist organisation inviting Strutt to join them. He was undoubtedly one of many they were targeting for funds. And from the same year is this article about the Milford Nursing Association, explaining how it worked and supported the village. A few years ago now, a dealer in old photographs approached the World Heritage Site with information about some albums he'd acquired relating to the Strutt family. The photographs dated back to portraits as early as 1861, in fact this one, of George Henry Strutt. We were able to acquire the albums with thanks to a donation from members of the Strutt family, and they now all reside at the Derbyshire Record Office. his uncle Anthony Radford Strutt, who was born in 1791, and his son George Herbert Strutt. Previously, we only had images of Herbert as an elderly bearded man, so it's a delight to see him in a casual pose during his university days. The Strutt women are well recorded as well. This is George Henry's wife Agnes, who even in 1862 was aware that a high contrast dress would be more striking for a portrait photograph in her Bridge Hill House conservatory. Her eldest child Susan is well photographed, as is her second child Lucy, and there's even one image of the youngest, Clara, although she died aged 2 of croup in 1863. The later albums seem to have belonged to George Herbert's second wife Emily. She had her own camera, and although rarely photographed, she recorded life for her young family from 1908 onwards, including this one from that year of Herbert with daughters Emily and Mardy. And there's this of him with his 3 daughters from his second marriage, as well as one from his first, Agnes, on the far left, outside the conservatory of Bridge Hill House. And this is his youngest son Arthur, aged just 3 days old. One great addition for the Record Office in recent years was this, a handwritten record of the Strutt's Watchman's reports covering 1832 to 1836. It was discovered for sale by a dealer in antique books, and thanks to a crowdfunder, we were able to raise the money required in less than 3 days. It's an invaluable resource for showing us what the Strutt night watchman did in terms of checking water levels and lighting the gas street lamps, but more than anything, of policing Belper, dealing with all sorts of issues, including, on this page, fighting in the lower rooms of Samuel Ward's gin shop on the marketplace. Each page is signed off by the Strutt's chief clerk William Bamford and provides invaluable social history about the world's first cotton mill town. The night watchman had to work to the clock, very specific clocks, devised by William Strutt, which needed pegs to be pushed down by the night watchman at certain times, to show they had followed their allotted route through the town and were where they should be throughout the night. The gas lamps they were required to light each winter evening had many small panes of glass, so they needed to report on the quality of the gas and record if any of the glass panes had been smashed, preferably with the name of the culprit as well. The most recent Record Office acquisition relating to the World Heritage Site has been these photographs from the 1960s, all mounted on card with a description. There are 97 images in total, covering industry from across the whole county, but many of them are from within the Derwent Valley and relate to the mills. They include this unusual view of the West Junction and Reeling mills at Belper, which were all demolished in the 1960s. And there are rare internal views of the mills, including the iron-framed North Mill. As well as the mills themselves, there are rare views of the ancillary buildings which clustered around them, all of which have long been demolished. And there are fine details of the pots which were used to create arches over the wheel pits to reduce the weight of the buildings on the pioneering iron frames. Particularly rare are views inside the West Mill, seen here empty of machinery, presumably shortly before its 1962 demolition. There are images inside the old Milford Mill as well, from before its 1964 demolition. Let's finish off with these, the Ordnance Survey minor control points, once used in the days before digital technology to help ensure maps were as accurate as they possibly could be. Surveyors were sent across the country after the Second World War to give exact positions to street corners, gateposts, anything distinctive in the landscape, so that measurements were as accurate as they could be. At Belper, much of the work was carried out in April 1948, and they provide images of parts of the World Heritage Site that usually go unrecorded, so are immensely valuable in helping us understand the area even as late as the 1940s. At Darley Abbey, the work wasn't carried out until 5 years later, in 1953, but give rare views of the mill exteriors, particularly where water once passed through to power the water wheels. Usefully, each photograph is partnered by another from across the road, so we get to see plenty of detail, including here the night watchman's office and the sluices at Darley Abbey. Let's have a quick look at some of the more interesting Belper ones. For example, here are the steps of the Park Tavern public house on the Butts, worn away on one side as only one door was ever unlocked. The Park Tavern was demolished to widen the road in 1970, and this is the only close-up we have of that corner. Here's Alder Road on the new Parks estate, just a series of curbstones before building work on the houses had begun. And Mount Pleasant Drive, where the road is still being surfaced and the curbstones laid out in April 1948. Another loss to the town is Cow Hill, where many houses were demolished in the 1950s and the area renamed Hillside Rise. So images of the lost houses, marked destroyed in the album, are a very useful record. Of course, parts of the Belper mill complex were also demolished, so again these 1940s views help us understand what was lost, including the reeling mill, next to which coal was stored, and across from that, the spinning mule building and stores, with the stables nearby, all now long gone. On the opposite side of the mill complex, this was the rear of the old canteen, built at the back of the East Mill in 1908 and originally a pavilion for the river gardens. And the gardens, in 1948, were looking a little grim, with this large pipe running the full length of the promenade. Elsewhere in town, this is the only photograph we know of showing the ice cream factory that once operated at the top of Long Row. And this is a rare view of the open slatted footbridge which connected the two platforms at Belper Station before King Street Bridge was widened for the building of a supermarket, Fine Fare, in 1973. This one, on the corner of King Street and Strutt Street, shows that a surveyor with a big white arrow was attracting plenty of attention from people in the town. But they were also attracting the interest of the town's dogs as well, as seen here on the fleet. At Milford, there's a glimpse of the old co-op shop on the Foundry Lane junction, and there's a very rare view of the back of Swainsley Court, a farm that was converted into mill workers' housing, then demolished completely in the 1960s. And finally, a view of Needham's Bakery on Belper Marketplace. Seeing all these fantastic images of surveyors with big white arrows, I hope you'll forgive me if I recreate that last one in the present day. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this has given a taste of why World Heritage status helps with research and the acquisition of records and artefacts, and why research is so important to a World Heritage site.